This is the Redcat Ascent, and this is the brand new Redcat Ascent Fusion. What we're going to be comparing today is the chassis. The new Redcat Ascent Fusion comes with a brand new carbon fiber chassis straight from the factory, but my other Ascent has the DSM Off-Road chassis on it. Which one of these is probably the better choice for you? I have had the opportunity to check out both of these chassis in detail, and I have 7 different things that we're going to look at that are nuanced differences between the two of these chassis that may help you make a choice as to which one you want to run. We're going to start with probably one of the most obvious differences. The Redcat Fusion chassis was designed to be interchangeable parts with the factory aluminum chassis and shock tower. So what you see here is you have one major carbon fiber structure the whole way through, but then you see individual shock towers here. So that means that this chassis is actually 3 total pieces. You have the rail, and then you have both the front and rear shock tower. What that then means is you have to bolt those things together. So you end up with extra screws, extra washers, extra supports across in order to bolt these together. When you compare that to the DSM chassis, it's all one piece. And so that means there's less components, there's less things. You don't have to have some of that cross bracing or parts bolted onto each other. It's just literally one total piece. The second item that becomes very obvious is the angle here of the center skid. The new Ascent Fusion is still using the factory flat skid, so there is no angle to it whatsoever. What you'll see here with the DSM is it does have, I forget what the angle is, 6 degrees or something like that. It's got a 5 or 6 degree angle in here on that skid. They did not do that on the Fusion, again, because they wanted it to be interchangeable with any aftermarket parts that had already been created for the standard chassis. But, in general, crawling theory is that this angled skid is better. So that'll be a nod to this DSM chassis for sure, that it would be slightly better because of that angled skid. Will you notice it in most situations? Good question. Depends on what level of performance you're trying to eke out. Item number 3 is related to that. Because that skid is angled, you end up having to have different side skids here. And DSM made them nice, cut in, very deep. So you're gaining a lot of clearance with it. But of course, they had to change the geometry in order to match that new skid shape. On the new Ascent Fusion side, these are actually the same skids that came with the truck originally, which means you have more of that boat side. Honestly, it just is personal preference as to which one you would like better, the more high clearance or the boat side. Both of them can work really well. I've gone ahead and taken the tires and wheels off in order to try to help measure some of these next things that we're talking about. Up first is both of these chassis have claimed to have lowered the center of gravity of the motor. The motor mount is actually shaped differently in order to bring it down. So we're going to try to measure from the table how high is the motor off the ground. I get just shy of 90 millimeters on the Ascent Fusion. Yeah, again, just about shy of it. So both of them put the motor about the same distance off the ground. Actually, it's hard to kind of put a super fine point on that motor placement. Quick pause in the action here just to say welcome. If you are new to the channel, my name is Troy. This is Roadside RC. I hope you're enjoying looking at the difference between these two chassis for the Redcat Ascent. If you're curious about anything else I do bashing and crawling and drifting and racing. I do product review videos. I do how-tos like this. So if you are interested, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification button, and I hope to see you in a future video. Because number 5 in our list is actually the shock mounting locations and just how dramatically different they're intended to be with both chassis. The Ascent Fusion uses the standard shock bottom mounting locations, and again, they're somewhat replicating the factory shocks on the original chassis, that mounting location up here. As DSM Off-Road developed this chassis, dramatic difference in theory about shock mounting. So moving those shocks, lower mounts, from up here on top of the axle to down here on next to the link mount, and then being able to really lay that front shock back. When you can compare those two differences, the angle that we have here versus the angle that we have here, and then also just the location. These shocks are so much more forward and more straight up and down compared to where DSM wants you to mount them on this side. Dramatic differences in the front, which is replicated back here in the rear as well. Again, the lower shock mounting position up here on top of the axle versus down here with the link mount. And then this angle that we have here coming all the way up to this height versus where this one, such a bigger angle all the way down here. I don't even have it in the utmost position, but every time we do, what it's doing is it's dropping this chassis down. When you're mounting this lower link down here and you're having the whole shock mount down further, the whole chassis is allowed to drop down further than it would otherwise. We're reducing the total center of gravity that way. It's really got to be, just from a basic physics standpoint, that's really got to be the smarter way of going about it. Trying to just put some simple numbers to it here. As an example, this front shock mount is right at about 120 millimeters off the ground, whereas when you compare it over here, that's 10 millimeters lower. That's about 110. At the rear, that's about 115 versus all the way down at 90. So 25 millimeters shorter over here where that upper shock mount is. Now, at the end of the day, do the shocks weigh a lot? They don't. And so, you know, them being lower for a center of gravity, not a huge deal, but you know, it is just the options that you have here versus with this Ascent Fusion chassis. It just is a lot different. I am personally curious if there's something that can be done here actually with this Ascent Fusion rear shock tower. Can this be moved forward? Can we take this whole shock mount, this upper shock tower, and can we move it forward using this hole that's already existing here? Maybe we have to drill a new hole for the rear mount. Maybe we have to do something like that to get it to line up appropriately, but then drop that lower shock mount down. There's a chance that we could do that and mimic a little bit what DSM Off-Road has done here for zero cost. The next item I wanted to look at for this is because of the angled skid and some of the other geometry they've done here on DSM, I'm curious if they've actually changed the forward to rear placement of the motor compared to the front axle. Because, you know, anything that you can do to move this transmission forward, motor forward, does help with your front rear weight balance. So when I measure from the center line of the front axle back, I get about 45 millimeters to the motor, to the front of the motor, and that's about 130 millimeters to the front of the transmission. If we swap over and try to do the same thing on the DSM chassis, I get, well, that's about 45 millimeters, and that is maybe just shy of 130. Maybe there's like a 2 millimeter forward there. Maybe that's, honestly, that might be just because of the angle of that skid, making that couple millimeters of that forward movement there. But really, at the end of the day, no difference between these, so it's kind of a toss-up there. The last item for these two chassis is that they're both made to work with your stock components. So whether or not you have actually started from the Ascent Fusion or you started from the standard Ascent, you can bolt both of these chassis on with no extra customization or modification necessary. So a lot of the times with aftermarket carbon fiber chassis and crawlers, you end up making a bunch of links. You end up making different mounts for the shocks and all this kind of stuff. You don't need to do that in this situation. So if you're coming from the standard Redcat Ascent, you can bolt either one of these chassis on very easily in an hour or two and have the increased performance. If you are coming from the standard Redcat Ascent and you're either thinking about choosing the Redcat chassis or the DSM Off-Road chassis, which one would I suggest that you get? I think I'd suggest that you go ahead and get the DSM. I think there's a few things in here that make more sense as far as alternate shock mounting locations and the angled skid and the one piece, the lower shock mounts on the front, on their bottom, like everything that they're wanting you to do here. I think that that is a smarter choice compared to what the this Ascent Fusion chassis is. But if you have the Ascent Fusion chassis, do I think, and I'm not sure it is worth the extra $100 to jump over here to the DSM chassis. If you're starting from this truck, it already is lightweight enough, and maybe there's some other things that we can do with moving some of these shock towers around and all that in order to make some different changes. to where you get a lot of the advantage of this chassis at basically zero cost. So I think it really depends which chassis you go with, depends on where you are. Do you already have this one because you got the Fusion? Then just keep it. It's going to be good enough. If you are coming from the original Ascent chassis, the metal Ascent chassis, then I'd probably go with the DSM one. Get its specific skids while you're at it. DSM also offers like a different battery mount for the front and some things along those lines, so you can really transform your Ascent all with one-stop shop coming from DSM Off-Road. I hope this video was useful for you. Let me know if you have any questions or comments about it. Leave those down in the video comments below. I'll be happy to answer any of those that I can. If you're curious about anything else that I've done with this Redcat Ascent, or how to actually assemble this DSM chassis to your truck, and the specific gains that you get versus the metal chassis that came, that'll be in this Redcat Ascent playlist. It's going to pop over here to your right. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.